was young, I loved knots. No, not like Knott's Berry Farm, but knots, like tying knots. They fascinated me. Growing up, my dad was a fisherman, and he used to spend what felt like hours teaching my sister and I the intricacies on how to tie the perfect knot. Everything from a square knot to a sheep shank to tying hooks onto fishing line with a Palomar loop or a traditional slip knot. And I remember as a little boy being mesmerized at the dexterity of his hands to make a loop and go around and through and out the other end. And I was frustrated because my pudgy little fingers weren't nimble enough to recreate his movements. But after a lot of practice, I began to get the hang of it, and I found myself focusing less on the motion of his hands and more on their appearance. And for the first time, I saw the scars, and the clefts and the divots and the scratches and the scabs that denoted a lifetime of tying hooks onto line. My dad told me that hooks were much more dangerous than something like, say, a needle, because with a needle you can poke yourself and pull it back out and you'd be fine, but with a hook, it has a barb on it. And if you ever have the misfortune of getting caught by a hook, the more you try and pull it out, the deeper it embeds itself into your skin. That's how hooks work. That's how you catch a fish. And so as much as I loved tying knots, I was equally terrified of hooks. But in the comfort of my home, I actually got pretty good at tying knots. And it was my thing. It's what made me unique. Until one day, my dad took me out on a boat onto the ocean, and I found myself swaying back and forth and back and forth. And despite all the motion, I was determined to tie my own hook because I was good at it. But as I was struggling with the line, my dad saw that I wasn't doing it quite right, so he said, let me give you a hand there, son. And I said, wait, no, Dad, I can do this, let me do this. He said, no, you're doing it wrong. And I said, no, let me do this, I can do this. He said, wait, let me help you. And I said, no, Dad, leave me alone. I was so busy arguing with my dad, I didn't notice that I was making a knot around my hands. The very thing I was so good at was tying me up. And as I pulled away from my father, I sank the hook deep into my palm. And it hurt. It was painful. But I don't remember that day because of the pain of the hook. I remember that day because it was the first time that I ever raised my voice at my father. The first time that I told him I didn't need him. And more than the shock of half of a hook sticking out of the palm of my hand was a sense of embarrassment and shame. So I looked at my hand and I clenched my fist and I turned towards my dad. And the first thing that I saw were his hands. And I looked up at his face with tears welling up in my eyes, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Son, I know."